Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us this afternoon for this information meeting about the call for development research proposals for the 2025 round. We're very happy that so many people are joining us, and I can see that people are still coming in. You're all very welcome, but we'll just begin the session now. So I will just stop sharing my screen here and introduce ourselves. My name is Line Richter. I'm with the Danida Fellowship Center, and we administer the research grants and this application round. I'm very happy to have Lotte Meinert, the vice chair of the consultative committee. The consultative committee for research. What do we call it in English? We're so used to the Danish abbreviation. Apologies for that. Lotte is also a professor of anthropology at Aarhus University. So thank you for joining us. I'm also very happy to have my colleague Cecilia Gregersen from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs here with us today, who will give us a brief tour of kind of the overall political ideas behind the call for Research Proposal 2025. So let me just start sharing my screen again and just briefly introduce what we will go through today. I'm sorry, this is a little bit slow. It does not shift the screen. So today, here we have it. First of all, Cecilia will give us an introduction to the call. Then I will go through the application process. And finally, Lotte will take you through how to write a good application and what criteria the committee assesses the applications on. So we're very happy that you're here. Just briefly, the session, as you may have noticed, is being recorded. We will also put it online on our website after the session, so anyone can go back to this and refer to what you've learned today. Please ask the questions that you may have in the chat. As you see, we have a question and answering session at the end. So keep your questions if they're not answered by any of the three presentations. Feel free to ask them in the chat, and my good colleagues here at DFC will try to pick up on as many questions as we can possibly take during this 1.5 hours, or maybe less if we don't have so many questions. We're very happy to have you here, and please do keep the chat open. I will now give the floor to my colleague Cecilia. Thank you for joining us.
There we go. I hope I'm online now. It's great to see so many participants. I'm happy to be here. As Line introduced, I'm from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and in collaboration with the Danida Fellowship Center, we work on the yearly call for proposals. So I'll start out my introduction with a brief overview of some of the strategic aspects that lay ground to the focus of this year's call for development research applications. So primarily about the thematic focus, the geographic focus, and some overall pointers. So just to start out with highlighting some of the important policy documents that frame the Ministry of Foreign Affairs grants to research projects. So including the overall objective, which is actually stated in the Danish law on international development cooperation. So it sort of gives the two primary purposes of granting support to research projects from our development cooperation budget. So with a view to strengthening research capacity in developing countries and creating new knowledge to address development challenges, the Minister for Development Cooperation may provide grants for research. And beyond the law on international development cooperation, there are a number of strategic documents that frame the basis of our prioritization. So next slide. We introduce some of the Danish Development Corporation's policy. It's called The World We Share. And in this policy or strategy, the role of partnerships for development cooperation are highlighted as key to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030. And of course, research partnerships play a very active role in this part. So the World We Share, the policy document states that partnerships between Danish universities and the research community in the Global South are important for generating knowledge and capacity to formulate good, well-considered policies and thereby sustainable outcomes. So this really frames the overall reasoning behind our call for development research applications. And on the next slide, yes, we also have a document called the Strategic Guidance Document for Danish Development Research Support, which was published on Danida Fellowship Center's website in March. And it provides an overview of our strategic priorities and management. And then it includes these 7 guiding principles for the development research that Danida wishes to support. And these are also included as upfront in the call for applications. But with these 7 guiding principles, we're trying to define the kind of development research that we wish to support through these grants. So I'm just briefly going to go through those. And the first one is, of course, that we aim to produce high quality scientific knowledge that addresses sustainable development challenges. So this really, in essence, this principle comes first, as this is at the core of it. We want to support excellent research that produces new knowledge and engages with the sustainable development challenges that we face today. The second one is that we wish for the research that we grant to pay attention to the contextual relevance and stakeholder engagement. So our grants go out to prioritize geographic country or geographic areas, in particular countries, context. So we really urge all of those who want to apply for our funding to engage with the context, to think about why is your research relevant in exactly the country that you are choosing to focus on. How does this engage with the national development priorities and context? What are the most important stakeholders to engage in your research, to ensure that your research project and application is as fit for purpose in the specific country that you are focusing on? The third one is that we think that development research should acknowledge the multidimensional nature of sustainable development challenges. And this is really a nod to how important we find interdisciplinary research is, because it can bridge the understandings of and tackle the complex issues that many communities face. Often there are lots of interconnected factors or systems that are important to understand for your research to have an impact in terms of contributing to the SDGs. And then fourth, there's the principle of leaving no one behind, and this is central to the Sustainable Development Goals themselves. And this is, it's based on these universal values in the SDGs, and the acknowledgement that eradicating poverty is central to development cooperation, and that there should be a focus on ending discrimination and exclusion, where we focus a lot on gender and other vulnerable groups and minorities. Fifth principle is that we think that development research should recognize the crucial role of researchers and universities in the Global South as providers of scientific knowledge and innovation, research-based education, and advice to society. This principle really highlights the role of our partners in the South, and always engaging with the knowledge systems, and having a strong involvement of both sides of the research partners that we fund. These are North-South partnerships, collaborations between Danish-based researchers and institutions in the Global South. So it's really important that both sides of the partnership are engaged from the very beginning of designing the project and the application. And I think Line will come back to this later. Danida Fellowship Center have a lot of really great resources on exactly this part and this type of partnership that we fund through our grants. The sixth principle is about equitability in research partnerships. This is maybe obvious to some, but it can be a challenge for others. So again, our funding is for research partnerships, and it can become quite complex to manage and administer this type of partnership, funding-wise, administrative-wise, but also bridging differences in your academic setting. So we encourage all of our applicants to reflect on the power differences and inequalities in the relationship between northern and southern, or north-based and south-based researchers and in the academic world. And then finally, the seventh principle is about critically examining development efforts to learn from mistakes. So we think that engaging with researchers and critical research is important for us to contribute to a learning of ethos, or an ethos of learning, and that can help Danish Development Corporation design more effective and impactful development engagements. So we really do hope that our research, the research we fund, comes back full circle to our colleagues in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, but also policymakers involved in development engagements in the countries of focus of our research. So we really urge you to go out and bring your results to practitioners. Yes, so that was about the sort of overall priorities of Danida funding development research. But now I'm going to move on to the specific strategic decisions that have been made in the 2025 call for development research. Yes, and there we are, finally, this slide with the overall 2 themes for the call of 2025. So this is different from the past years, where we have had one main focus on climate change, and then have had different angles on climate change as the overall topic. But this year we have 2 separate themes that you can select to apply to. The first one is climate change and the environment, and the second one is global health. And you can choose to apply with a focus on either of these 2 themes. In the application system, you'll have to choose which one is your primary theme, but I'm not saying that there are not overlaps between the 2 themes. I'm just, you will have to make the choice which one is your primary theme. And then under the theme of climate change and the environment, we wish to support research that addresses the multiple pressing challenges of climate change and environmental degradation. This could, for example, be about enhancing resilience among poor and vulnerable people, avoiding maladaptation, where climate interventions may inadvertently actually increase vulnerability or exacerbate existing tensions and conflicts. And then also this could be context-specific climate adaptation or mitigation efforts that consider the fundamental needs of communities and the existing governance arrangements in whatever topic you choose to focus on. And then we also have quite a long list of examples of topics that fall under this theme. And these are just examples that we've highlighted because they align very well with Danish Development Corporation priorities, but also some of the strategic sector collaboration that we also engage in, that I'll explain further about later. But so these are just examples of topics that we find fall well under this overall theme. But I want to stress that this year in the call, we have hoped to make it quite open, so you can find a way to fit your research under this overall topic of climate change and the environment. The second theme is global health. And here we invite research that addresses pressing global health challenges. And the areas of interest could, for example, be the shifting double burden of communicable and non-communicable diseases, could be increasing mental health concerns, or One Health issues that fall at this interconnection between human, animal, and environmental health. Again, the aim is to have quite an open theme, but we've given some pointers about, important factors such as examining the underlying socioeconomic factors that contribute to illness. What is the provision of care for physical or mental health in situations of resource scarcity that may be relevant? We're also interested in context-specific strategies to ensure that health policies and systems are responsive to the needs in the country. improve health outcomes, and build resilience against future health threats, such as epidemics. And then just a little note that proposals that contribute to achieving equitable sexual and reproductive health and rights are welcome. This has been a very long-standing priority of Danida's support to health historically. So that's just a note from our side. And then I've included two things sort of that cut across both of the themes. It's to think about vulnerability in many different dimensions. Consider again how the principle of leaving no one behind may be relevant for your choice of focus in your research. Is there gender sensitivity that you should take into account? How inclusive or exclusive is the topic towards vulnerable populations? And how can your research engage with the local knowledge that exists in this focus area? And then always think about potential negative consequences and outcomes for populations affected by the research. Yes, and then also again, I think I mentioned this in the guiding principles, interdisciplinarity is particularly encouraged. Our grants is very cross-disciplinary, and all different disciplines are invited to apply for our grants. And yeah, we encourage interdisciplinary approaches because we see that so often it makes sense in engaging with these sustainable development challenges that the research that we fund usually engages with. And it's what I said under the guiding principle. It's about bridging different understandings and tackling the complex issues, considering the systems and governance arrangements that influence the impact of your research and the development outcomes that you may wish to be contributing to. So just again, a nod to the importance of interdisciplinarity. I think then I'm going towards the countries, the geographic focus. This is the full list of eligible countries for research applications in the 2025 call. It's a long list this year. We have added a number of new countries. It's a selection we make every year based on the priorities of Danish Development Corporation. We focus primarily on Africa and low-income countries. And you may want to explore the recently published strategy for strengthened Danish engagement with African countries, where it was also announced that we're strengthening our diplomatic presence in a number of African countries. And that's why we have new countries added on our list this year: Algeria, Rwanda, Senegal, and Tunisia, where there are embassies that will be strengthened or that will be opening in the coming year. So that's why they've been included this year. But I also have to note the eligible countries are not limited to African countries, and there's a number of longstanding partnership countries that are included, such as Bangladesh, Vietnam, and Palestine. And then there's also these asterisks on some countries. So these are countries where Denmark has a strategic sector collaboration, where there's a peer-to-peer partnership between different governmental institutions that focus on specific themes. And most of these themes do fall under climate change or health. So we encourage applicants who want to focus on countries with an asterisk to go in on our embassy's websites and check what is the focus of the strategic sector collaboration in those countries. Yes, and there's a little note in the call document about if you are successful and have chosen a topic that falls in under this strategic sector collaboration focus, we particularly encourage you to engage with our colleagues. Another specific note is an exception regarding South Africa, and that's because South Africa is actually the only upper middle income that has been included in this year's list of eligible countries. And in light of that, we have chosen to urge applicants to find partners at universities beyond the top 3 ranked universities in South Africa. So there's a little note that the University of Cape Town, University of Witwatersrand, and Stellenbosch University are not eligible as project lead or primary partners. And that does not mean that they cannot be engaged in your application as secondary partners, but we really want you to try to look beyond those universities to find primary partners if you choose to focus on South Africa. And then the final note is if you do choose to apply for a research project that covers more than one of the eligible countries, we do see this and sometimes we do fund this, but we think it's really important that you pay attention to both, you explain and justify the reasoning behind why you need to include several countries, because that must outweigh the complexity of planning comparative research involving several countries and several partners under the same project frame. So it's just a note of caution. It is possible, we do fund it, but it must be well justified. And then a final little note before I pass it on to Lina is that in this year's call, we have also opened up for opportunities for South-based institutions to apply as project lead. This is based on the value we find in engaging or funding long-term. We think the results of our research funding are particularly impactful when it's based on well-established partnerships. So Lina will explain a bit further about the two types of main applicants and where the requirements for South-based applications to be the primary or the project leaders or responsible institutions. But I think Lina will go through all the administrative details and requirements of the call. So that was just mainly about the geographic and thematic focus for now. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Cecilia, very much for that. I think we need to mute something here. We're good. So I will go through the application process and some of the more administrative parts of this call. So I'm having a little bit of screen sharing issues, so forgive me for flipping through too fast or too slow here. So the application process consists of two phases. So the current call is the one that outlines how to compose a phase 1 application. And as you may have read in the call, if you have not done so yet, please take a look at the call document on the website. The deadline for submitting proposals is on 29th of January. It's at 1 p.m. Central European time, and there is no grace period. So we close down the system. So please be in good time if you do submit an application. Such a shame to not make it due to any kind of technical issues or something. So please be mindful of that. All the applications are then processed by us and by the committee. And a number of the phase 1 applications will be invited to go to a phase 2 and create a full application, which is a more elaborated concept of your or elaborated document of your research project. You can find the guidelines for phase 2 for the 2024 round for reference on our website, but of course this will be new guidelines that refers to this call for applications. All projects must start on 1st of April 2026, and the project periods are up to 5 years, and you can apply for up to 10 million crowns. And there is the possibility also to apply for up to 400,000 crowns in security funds, but that's part of phase 2 application processes in general. As Cecilia just mentioned, we are happy to be able to introduce two modalities of applications and two types of main applicants. So the first type is Danish universities or research-based institutions with the capacity to co-supervise PhD students. Second of all, as Cecilia mentioned, we invite South-based universities or research institutions in the eligible countries with a capacity to co-supervise PhD students as well that have been involved in a Danida-funded research project completed after 1st of January 2022 to apply. If you are a South-based university or a South-based researcher, there are certain criteria that apply, and this is, as Cecilia mentioned, due to the fact that this is a way to support ongoing partnerships. So there are certain criteria, such as that the PI must be able to document a substantial role in the previous Danida-funded research project. They could have been a PI, they could have been a work package leader in the previous project. The application must be in collaboration with at least one of the same Danish partner institutions as in the previous projects. It must build on the same partnerships or the same collaborations, but this does not mean that you're not able to invite new institutions, new people into the project. At least 2 key researchers from both the applying institutions and from the Danish partner institutions must have had substantial roles, PI or work package leaders, and must be able to document that at least a substantial amount of time has been put into the previous project. And this is to support this undergoing partnership and ensure that the project will be successful. So we do hope to see some applications from previous, maybe primary partners that want to take the lead in this round. So the PI must hold a PhD or equivalent and be affiliated with the responsible institution. It's also possible to have a co-PI in order to share the responsibility and maybe also some of kind of the managerial leadership role. And the co-PI must also hold a PhD and also be affiliated with the responsible institution. And this is just kind of also a technical issue, so you cannot split the co-PI and the PI between the Danish and the South partner. It must be at the same institution. The research team, you can set it as you wish, I would say, but it's of course important that the research team holds a research background and it must be related to the topic applied for. And I'm sure that Lotte will also give some more advice on how to ensure this, or at least what not to do also. The application must include minimum 1 research-based institution in Denmark and in the country where the research will be undertaken. And all partners must contribute actively in preparing both phase 1 and phase 2 applications. And the application as such is not that long, but we know there is a lot of time needed to be able to actually have this mutual involvement in the process. So please do start early to talk about your research applications with your partners, and not least find your research partners if you have not yet done so. You are able to involve private sector partners and national authorities. You're actually encouraged to. We do have special conditions that apply for for-profit private companies that you can read more about in the call. International research institutions, as well as these partners and national authorities in countries outside Denmark and partnering countries, can be secondary partners. And this is also kind of budgetary matters, what they can actually be budgeted with. You can read more about that in the call. I'm sure we'll also get some questions to these matters. So everything that you do in terms of application and where you will receive any kind of feedback, etc., is within our online application system, SurveyMonkey Applied. And you can access it from the website. It's where you find the call. It's very important that it's the PI who creates the e-application and that the PI uses their primary email address for this. as soon as you've done this, then you are the owner of the project and you can invite other people in as collaborators in the system. But the owner will always receive the information. So please be sure that it's the PI who actually starts the application. I know it's a bit technical, but it's quite important in the further process. It's quite important to consider gender balance, and it must be considered, and is also considered by the research committee, how the gender composition is. And then be careful to think about this, and please do use the resources available on our website. We have a wonderful talk by Professor Sarah Sally, who talks about gender-sensitive research. So if you are unsure on how to ensure a gender dimension in your research proposal, or think that it's not possible to find any male or female or any other, or balance out the team composition, please do check out the resources available. I'm sure there are some good hints to be found there for everyone. Furthermore, we ask you to consider security, and all research applications are required to consider the security risks affecting the feasibility of the research. And this means that in this phase, applicants are requested to include a preliminary risk assessment and contingency plan related to this risk assessment. We do have instructions for this in the application system. And you're also, of course, invited to reflect on data security, as it is becoming a more and more important issue to consider. High-risk countries include in Ethiopia, Nigeria, Palestine, and Somalia, including Somaliland. But there may be reasons why your research project in another country is also kind of prone to risk, security risks. So please do consider whether that is the case for your project. It could also be a regional thing in some countries. Recommendations is that, of course, you carefully read the call and the instructions in the e-application form. It's all on our website. And make yourself acquainted with the reasons most often given for rejection. We've put up a document called Assessment Criteria, Rejection Codes, and Examples to kind of show what is it when there is a certain criteria, what is it that the committee looks for, and why do some projects not live up to that? What are the kind of the most common reasons for not living up to these criteria? You must also comply with the formal requirements set in the call, and you must fill in the e-application correctly. We do take it seriously, and we do kind of administratively reject some proposals if they do not live up to the formal requirements. So do read the call carefully. Start well ahead of the deadline, as I said earlier. And you can also familiar yourself with the document, How to Write a Good Proposal, available at the DFC website. I'm sure Lotte might also talk about this. You must involve partners, planning, ensure ownership, adjust expectations throughout this process. So do start early. You need to have all endorsements submitted before you're able to submit the application in the system. That means that the heads of the partners must endorse in this phase one the application. So also involve them. Once you've submitted, there's no changing. So please be mindful that it's the final versions of whatever documents that you have that you are submitting, because you cannot change it afterwards, and we cannot change it at DFC. Our website holds a bunch of useful information. We have the research portal where you can find all the granted research project funded by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and it holds a goldmine of good information about projects. So do look into it if you are planning to do a project in Kenya. Look at what other kinds of projects are being done, or maybe in your specific theme. There's so much good information on that. You can go into their website, etc. But it's on the research portal in the Danida Fellowship Center. If you don't, we can write the address in the chat if some of you would like that. As mentioned, we have gender sensitivity tools and more information, and we have useful videos and online tools on how to go about equitability and partnerships, etc. There's so many good resources on our website, so do familiarize yourselves with that. And I am so happy to see Lotte here. So I'll give the floor to her, and she'll talk us through the criteria for selection. And thank you, Lotte.
Thank you very much, Line. Can you hear me well? I hope so. So as Line said, my name is Lotte Meinert, and I am the vice chair in this consultative research committee. And I'm going to say something about what do we consider a good research application? What are the specific criteria for selection? And I'm sure that many of you know these very well, but I'm going to repeat and emphasize. So next slide, please. So it's important to know that we are the Consultative Research Committee is a cross-disciplinary committee. So we are members from very different disciplines. And this is important to keep in mind when you prepare your project and your proposal, because your application needs to be readable from many different disciplinary perspectives. So what this committee does is to assess the phase 1 and phase 2 application, and then we recommend those that we prioritize for funding by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And we also participate in the quality assurance of those projects that are funded. We read their annual and final reports. We have a strict policy of conflict of interest as in all Danish research councils. So in case we know any applicants or have collaborated with them, we have to exclude ourselves. Next slide, please. So I'm going to go through the specific criteria for assessment. It's quality, relevance, and effect as 3 overall areas. And the first and most important one, I would say, is the scientific quality of the proposal. And we evaluate these on the basis of this set of criteria. We look at the originality and innovative nature of the project in terms of whether it actually creates new knowledge. We also look at whether the focus of the project is well defined in relation to existing relevant research, which you of course also have to write about. We look at the design of the project in terms of methods and theory, and if relevant, the interdisciplinary approaches. And as Line said before, this is something that we very much encourage, interdisciplinary approaches. We also look obviously at the research experience and qualifications of the PIs and of the entire research team who have to send in their CVs. The second area we look at is relevance. So the relevance we evaluate on the basis of whether the focus of the project is well defined in relation to the guiding principles for support to development research, what Cecilia talked about, and also obviously the selected theme of the call. Then we also look at relevance in terms of how the project responds to the national development priorities in the country or countries that you are carrying out the research project in, and whether it's relevant for Danish development cooperation and for the Danish strategic sector cooperation. So there are several issues of relevance here. We also look at whether the project is well defined with respect to other ongoing research projects or development programs in the country or in the region where you carry out the research. And then lastly, in terms of relevance, we also look at whether the project is well suited for the specific political and socioeconomic and institutional context. And this also includes the security situation in the place you want to do your research project. So the third area of assessment is effect. And we look at these criteria. We consider whether the potential direct effects with respect to the selected sustainable development goals and the relation to existing development efforts are there. We look at how the project is positioned for use, for example, by collaboration with public or private stakeholders, which could promote some of your research findings and uptake some of the research findings. We also look at whether, and this is very important, whether the project contributes to strengthened research capacity at an individual level, PhDs, for example, but also at partnership levels and institutional levels, universities, for example. We also look at whether the project builds on principles of equity in the research partnership and whether, as Line mentioned before, whether it is gender sensitive. Next slide, please. Yes. So a number of recommendations here. Line also said this, but it cannot be said enough. Make sure that you address the call text. Read it really carefully and pay attention to these guiding principles for support to development research. It's really worth studying these to understand what kind of research projects we're looking for. And make sure that you address the theme of this specific call, not only a small part of the call, but you consider the whole call text. Another recommendation is to explain how the research contributes to new knowledge and capacity strengthening. So you have to explain how the project contributes by positioning the research in relation to existing research. You need to refer to what is there and what is already known, obviously. So research questions and hypotheses must really point to and describe the innovative nature of the proposed research. And remember, it's a cross-disciplinary committee, so we do not always know that this is new and innovative. You have to point it out to us, show what is already there and what is different and new about this. Also make sure that capacity strengthening elements are really considered seriously and based on the needs of the partner sector that goes beyond only PhD training. Another recommendation: carefully consider the socio-economic context and development dimension of the research. for all projects, no matter what you focus on. Because we do consider that the socioeconomic and institutional context of the research should be clear in the proposal. And you have to demonstrate sufficient knowledge of the national and regional context where your research will be conducted. I think Lina mentioned that we do fund multi-country comparative studies, and these can be very interesting, but you need to carefully explain why you include more, because they are also complicated. You need to apply for research clearance from 2 countries and take data from one country to another and so forth. Also, engage relevant public-private sector partners in the project, if you can, and explain how the research will be used and taken up by them. Another recommendation, make sure that the research questions appear clearly. Again, for a multidisciplinary committee. So it should be clear that the proposal is a genuine research project. We sometimes get applications that look more like development projects. That's why we say a genuine research project with clear research questions. And you must identify 1 or more research questions which are not then only intellectually challenging, but also relevant for the context and under-researched. So under-researched. And you have to demonstrate that you have then collected the right group of researchers to answer these specific questions. And it's very important that the proposal is focused and that it's realistic. You believe you can do it with this group and the time given and the funds given so that it's feasible. Make sure that the research proposal is feasible, builds on equal partnerships, and that it's gender sensitive. This is repetition, but it's because it's so important. Must be quite clear in the proposal how the research is structured, and this can, for example, be done in work packages. You have to ensure that there's a good balance between inputs from each of the project partners and that you include competences from the whole team. And I've said it before, but consider interdisciplinarity an asset. Or if your research is monodisciplinary, explain why. Why is this important to do from this one disciplinary perspective? It must be clear in the proposal who does what and why the team composition is the way it is. It's also important that main researchers, the PIs, allocate sufficient time to carry out the research. So in this way, it also has to be feasible. And also remember to explain how you consider the gender dimensions of the research. Lina mentioned that it's not always possible to have a perfect gender balance, but then write about why the gender balance is the way it is in this particular project. Make the research idea come across clearly. This can also not be said enough. Clarity, both in terms of the focus, what is it that these people want to do, is so important, but also in terms of text quality. I would say that writing simple is more important than getting everything in there, because you have to remember that you're addressing the entire committee. And in the first round, we all vote for all projects. So make sure the research is analytical rather than merely descriptive. It does need to be a proper research project in that way. So it's important to specify the key concepts, and these should not be 25, but maybe 1, 2, 3 key concepts. And remember that people from other disciplines do not necessarily know what these concepts mean, so don't take that for granted. And also describe what data is needed and what you will collect, what methods are being employed, and how all of these things connect. I find that we all find that it's a really good idea to ask colleagues from your own discipline, but also a friend or somebody from another discipline to go through the proposal to check whether your research idea comes through to a broader audience. So lastly, this is a repetition in a way, but just to caution you, do not apply for development projects because these grants are really for research, development research. So also, we do not fund product development projects or technology transfer projects where you've tried out one technology, you'd like to try out if this also works in a different setting. We don't fund that. Also, do not apply for data collection projects without a really thorough description of how the data will be used and analyzed and theorized. Also, these grants are not for consultancy type activities, and they are not, I could see there was a question in the chat about, can I apply for a PhD? They are not for individual PhD projects. So it needs to be these are team projects, and you need sufficient involvement of senior researchers that are able to allocate enough time as key applicants. So this was a tour de force of our presentation. Now over to you, Line. We have time for questions.
Thank you so much, Lotte, for all this good advice and a bit of words of caution as well. I can see that the chat has been very active, and I would like to invite my colleague Ida, who has followed the chat, to be the MC of this question and answering session and ask us the questions, and she may direct them to either one of us, depending on what the question is related to. So over to you, Ida.
Thank you. I will try, and my apologies.
Cannot hear you.
Oh,
can we hear her?
You cannot hear me?
Okay, I'm sorry. It was mine.
Okay, great. Thank you. So I'll try as best I can, and my apologies if some questions are not directly covered, because I'm trying to kind of pull questions together a little bit, because there are some questions that are repeated a little bit, and other questions might be a little bit too technical. So if you don't feel like your question is responded to now, please do write us an email at ffu@dfcenter.dk, and we'll be happy to respond to your questions. So I'll try to keep to questions that might be of interest to everyone following now. I think there are some main questions, and I'm also trying to keep track of the questions that are coming in now as well. But I think some of the first questions that came in were during your presentation, Cecilia, where some were asking to get a little more explanation on some of the country choices. And maybe you can repeat a little bit on the decision to include only some institutions in South Africa, and also whether, and if so, how those institutions might be eligible to participate in a project.
I think I'm online now. So thank you for those questions. First, I'll go back to the country choice. So in the strategic guidance note on development research, which you can find on Danida Fellowship Center, it's a sort of a note that explains what prioritizations do we make in our grants for research. And there we have a principle that we generally try to align the eligible countries with the countries where there is significant Danish development cooperation. And this is the idea that when we fund research from our development cooperation budget, we wanted to be aligned and feed into our development cooperation engagements. So historically, we have some long-standing Danida partnership countries that have always been included in our calls for research. For example, Tanzania, Uganda, Kenya. And then, but every year we take a review on what does Danish Development Corporation, what are the priorities right now? We have a number of years ago decided to include the countries where we also have strategic sector collaboration. So this is a specific modality of development cooperation where we have some thematic partnership focuses. So those have gradually been included in our call for development research, but every year it's a little different what the requirements are in terms of the themes for the countries. Generally, the focus is primarily on Africa and low-income countries. And this aligns very well with the Danish Development Corporation partnership countries. There are a number of countries where Denmark has strategic sector collaboration that are excluded from the development research call. The decision is based partly on having a limited budget for development research, so we can't spread it too thinly across the globe, so we need to focus and select some. So countries where Denmark has strategic sector collaboration, but where the countries are upper middle income countries, and we use the OECD DAC classification, which is like a technical reference point for what we can designate as development ODA, official development assistance. So we use the OECD classification of which countries have graduated to upper middle income countries. And therefore, there are some countries that were included last year, for example, Indonesia, which has now been classified as an upper middle income country according to that list, so they're not included this year. Another consideration is which countries where do we have Danish embassies? So generally, all the countries that we've included in the list have Danish embassies. With this strategy for Danish engagement in Africa, there was announcement of what embassies are closing, for example, in the Sahel in the next year. And then also that there are opening new embassies in, for example, Senegal and Tunisia, and that's why they've been included in this year's call. So it's an exercise every year, reviewing what's the status and how does this align best with the Danish Development Corporation partnership. And then to repeat the exclusion of some institutions in South Africa, and this is because South Africa is in fact an exception to our rule about prioritizing lower income countries. South Africa is actually classified as an upper middle income country on this OECD DAC list, but because we have this prioritization of Africa, especially now as Africa is with the strategy for Danish engagement in Africa, we decided to include it in this year's call. But we did make this specific decision about excluding some South African universities. We have reviewed what other like-minded donors do in terms of which institutions, and decided that we want to urge our applicants to try to look quite broadly at the universities in South Africa. Are there partners at different universities that you could include as your primary partners? But I just want to stress again, this doesn't mean that these 3 institutions are excluded from applications. They're just not eligible as primary partners or principal primary institutions, but they can be included as secondary partners. And so I would ask you to review the call document for what are the conditions for secondary partners. So yeah, I hope that answers the first questions.
Thank you so much, Cecilia. And kind of tied to that a little bit, there are also some questions that are surrounding the SSC, Strategic Sector Corporations, which was previously a lot more integrated in the calls. And some are asking whether is it possible to apply for projects that might not be directly linked to the SSC if you apply in a country which has an SSC collaboration. And also, what do you mean when you say that if you do apply in a country with an SSC collaboration, you should check out the SSC?
Yes, I hope everybody can hear me again. Thank you for the question. So the strategic sector collaboration has previously had, I think a number of years ago, there was a separate window where you could apply and only apply with applications that were directly linked to the themes of the strategic sector collaboration in the countries. This year, we have decided to open it up quite broadly. So you are not required to focus on the specific theme of the strategic sector collaboration in countries such as Egypt or Ghana, where there's been a restriction on the topic. This year, you can choose your research focus between the 2 overall themes and all of the eligible countries. However, we do have great experience with research projects that have been closely linked to our strategic sector collaboration. So the asterisk is simply to encourage you, and it's also been explained by Lotte that we really want you to engage with the context in the country. What are the national development priorities? What are the Danish Development Corporation engagements? Does your research focus happen to fall under the focus of the Danish strategic sector cooperation? We highly encourage you to engage with them, and most likely your research can feed quite nicely into that. But it is not, you're not restricted to the strategic sector collaboration focus in this year's call.
Thank you so much, Cecilia. There were some confusion. I just want to clarify about Tanzania, which is eligible. I think our communications department missed highlighting Tanzania on the map, but it is on par with all other eligible countries. I just wanted to clarify because a few people asked about that in the chat as well. I think maybe I'll direct a question to Line. There are some different questions regarding eligibility of institutions, and a lot of them, or several of them, are on the eligibility of institutions in the Global South, whether INGO, international NGOs, or research-based NGOs are eligible as either lead or partner institutions. So maybe if you can just clarify what makes an institution eligible to apply either as lead institution or as a primary partner institution.
Thank you for that, Ida. So the primary partner or lead institution must be an institution that has the capacity to co-supervise PhD students. So that's one important aspect. It must also be a nationally registered research institution. And so some research-based NGOs may even be nationally registered, but I think that is a very rare case if they're registered as NGOs. But if you are an INGO or an NGO, you may be able to participate as secondary partners. And as Lotte also said, that can also be valuable in terms of uptake of the research to actually have these kind of engagements with secondary partners, and not least, of course, research institutions. But as these funds are meant also for capacity strengthening and sharing between research institutions, it is important that the primary partners or lead institutions are research institutions as such. I hope this clarifies the matter.
Thank you very much. And I hope so too. And I hope people feel like their questions are responded to, because I am kind of pooling a lot of different questions together. So I see quite a few people also asking whether Danida Fellowship Center can be of assistance in finding partners for projects either in Denmark or in the Global South. Maybe you can also tell more about this.
Thank you for that. As such, we do not facilitate any connections between institutions or people, but we do encourage people to use our research portal to look at what other research projects have been going on, who are working on these issues. I can also see in today's chat that the people are actually introducing themselves, so do use these connections. But if we cannot, as such, help you meet people other than what we have available on our website.
Thank you so much. I think maybe you can continue asking the next question as well. I'll stick to more of the DFC related questions. There are some asking about whether it's possible to apply if you already have an ongoing project. If you are a PI of a project that is still ongoing, can you still apply? And also, can you apply as PI for more than one project in this same round?
Thank you for that. Yes, you are able to apply while you already have a project. We, of course, recommend that you actually have the time to manage both your ongoing project and the one that you are preparing a proposal for. You can also apply on different applications as PI, but we cannot grant funds to more than one project per PI. So if you do move it on to phase 2, and you will somehow, there has to be a selection at some point between the two projects. You are also as a team member, say you are a work package leader or something, you can also be on different proposals or part of.
Thank you so much. Someone is also asking about the role of the Innovation Fund Denmark and the Danish embassies in the application round or the assessment of applications. So maybe you can quickly just...
Yes, someone has probably read the call text, and we have this timeline where it shows that after the committee does the assessment, what Lotte just mentioned of all these criteria and what they look for, then we also have an assessment by the Innovation Fund Denmark, and basically what they are looking for and what they have to ensure is that the research projects funded by the Danish government are actual research projects. So it's related to the first criteria that Lotte also mentioned might be the most important. It definitely is the most important by the Innovation Fund Denmark. This is a new procedure from this year's round. They will read all the phase 1 applications, and if they deem that a proposal is not a research project, for instance, or of a high enough quality research, they may say that it is not fundable. And if the Innovation Fund Denmark says it's not fundable, then basically the committee cannot move it through to the second round. There will be, if you do get such an assessment by the Innovation Fund, there will be a hearing process where you're able to respond, and then we will have to make a final decision on whether their assessment should stand or not. Even if that should be reverted, their decision, the FFU does, or the committee does not need to pass it on to the second round, just to be clear about that. So that was the Innovation Fund Denmark. The embassies are asked to also read all of the applications. So the embassies in the country where the project will be implemented, or in this case, in the case of some of the embassies that have not yet opened, it will be within the ministry in Denmark. Relevant people there are asked to assess the relevance of the project for the country context and the development context of that country. This happens before the committee receives all the applications, so it's part of what the committee also sees when they read the applications.
Thank you so much, Line. I think I'll just pose maybe one or two questions more for you, and then I have some for Lotte as well, because we don't have that much time left. If there should be some space for Lotte as well to elaborate on some of the things she said, but some, and I think it's because this is a new thing this year regarding applications from the Global South or from Danida partnership countries. Maybe you can just reiterate what the requirements are for someone applying for a South-driven research projects.
Yes, as mentioned, it is important that the proposal builds on an existing partnership, and it may be a partnership where the leadership role is flipped or where it's the same leadership role of the lead institution. It's important that it is a project that has finished their activities. They must be, and that it's a relatively new finished project. So this means that it has had to be completed after 1st of January 22 and before the date of application. In that project, the PI must have held a key role, some kind of substantial role. It could be as work package leader, and have put in a substantial amount of time into this research project and the research partnership. It must also be a collaboration with the same Danish partner, at least one of the same Danish partners, as in the previous project. It does not need to be the same project. You are able to, have another kind of project, or, maybe you've had a research project that was on climate change and health, but now you see that global health is a theme and you want to do a more kind of directly global health related project. You are able to do that. It does not have to be a continuation of the same project as such, but the partnership, it's important that it's the same and that you can show it in the CVs. And we have in the online application system, there is a bunch of questions that you will answer about kind of the partnership when doing the application or submitting it. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Line. I will move on to some questions more directed at Lotte for the Consultative Research Committee. I realize some questions from the chat might not have been answered, but if you have a specific question, you're welcome to email us at ffU@dfcenter.dk, and we can give you a response. But Lotte, there are, again, various different questions. One of them is, what would be a suitable level of experience or qualifications for someone applying as the PI for a research project?
Thank you very much for that question. Well, the PI has to hold a PhD and also have some management experience with research projects. So It can be senior researcher, it can be an associate professor, it can also be an assistant professor or a postdoc that has substantial experience doing research management. Or professor, of course, but I guess the question is more about the other end. Yeah.
Thank you so much. And some were also asking a little bit, maybe if you can elaborate on what the difference would be between development project and a research project, because this can maybe be a little bit of a muddy field.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. Really good question. Obviously, this is, you know, it's a gradual thing. You know, where does research end and where does development projects start? We want them to connect in a way, but the weight here should be on research. So I would stress that there has to be some question, some knowledge that you do not already know the answer to. If you already know the answer and you already have a solution that you simply want to implement, then it's not really research. Research can definitely be action research, and it can be, somebody also asked about clinical trials and social interventions. That can be part of the research, but the weight should be on the research and the fact that there's some knowledge that you do not know the answer to. But obviously this is we do want it to have a development relevance, obviously, and it's wonderful if some of this new knowledge can then be taken up by institutions who implement development projects. But it's about the weight, I think, and about, you know, that there's a knowledge gap, something you don't know, which you need a research grant to find out in order to move on.
Thank you very much. Another question is whether you can give any examples or elaborations on what might be additional examples of capacity exchange or development beyond PhD training, which is often part of the projects.
Yes, and obviously PhD training is a large part of these projects, but it could also be, for example, training of supervisors for supervising PhDs, or it could be training modules for postdocs. It could be writing articles for senior researchers. So other kinds of training that go beyond PhDs, but in the research institutions. Yeah, does this answer?
I think it does. Well, I hope it does. Thank you so much. I think we still have a bit of time left, so I might just return to some of the questions that were asked as well for Cecilia. Because there was a question, and the question was actually linked to why projects in Ethiopia did not get funding the past few years, which I might just add, there have been granted projects with partners in Ethiopia in the period 2022 to 2024. So Ethiopia has been part of research projects, but the question was also whether equal distribution of the funding between all the eligible countries is considered in this process or not.
Yes. Oh, we just need to. I need to turn it on, I think. So thank you for that question. I think, Ida, answered the part about, so Ethiopia has been included in the list of eligible countries for the past year, and we have had funded a number of projects in the past couple of years, so it is possible. In terms of the distribution, from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs point of view, it's important that we review the list of eligible countries, but we do not have any final say on the quota. We don't always have projects funded in each of the eligible countries. There's a big variation in the number of applications for different countries. Some countries we have not received applications for in certain years. So there's no sort of quotas that we want to meet in terms of distributing grants across the list of eligible countries. We leave it up to our very experienced consultative committee to assess the projects according to and select the ones that they all agree to are the best, and most often those are then the ones that will in the end get funded. I'm not sure if I missed part of the answer there. I think it was mainly about Ethiopia and the distribution about the countries. Oh, yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, thank you so much. And I see there are a few questions kind of coming in still. And there are also some questions that I didn't pose previously. Maybe Line, if you can just tell briefly, some people are asking about the inclusion of secondary partners from international institutions, whether that is possible, or international universities outside Denmark or the partnering countries.
Thank you for that. If I heard you correctly, it was about including other partners as secondary partners, and that is possible overall. There are very few restrictions on the secondary partners list, but they are there. The thing about secondary partners is that they can only be funded for direct input to the project. So that is for salaries and for travel and field work. Right, Ida? Correct me. Okay, you just looked skeptical. So please do consider if there are very important partners in your project that you need to include. For-profit companies, as I mentioned, is an exception. You cannot include salaries unless somehow you can document that these are extremely needed in the research project. And we have it in the call. It's more specified how to do this. I hope this answers it.
Me too. Thank you. There are also some that ask whether it's possible to be part of more than one application, and maybe I can just briefly explain that it is. There is limitation mentioned previously that if you apply as the PI for more than one project, you may only receive funding for one project, but you can be a project participant as well in several applications. And I think maybe there still is some need to clarify the question on whether you need to have been part of a previous Danida-funded research project in order to apply for grants, and maybe also the difference between this requirement for being the main applicant versus being a partner in a project.
So if you have not been part of a Danida-funded research project before, and if you are, you need to team up with, at least if you are from the Global South, then you need to team up with a Danish partner. Then you can easily be new to this modality of funding. We do welcome applications from new applicants, of course. And there will be many new because we have a list of eligible countries that have expanded at least compared to the previous years. So I hope that answers the first part of your question. And as I heard you, the second part was about the South-based, or was there a second part? Sorry, yes.
Yes, I think it was just to clarify what there's a bit of a different
Yes.
requirements regarding whether you are a partner
Yes.
or you are a main applicant.
Yes, so you cannot be lead applicant from the Global South if you do not build this on an existing partnership. But you're very welcome as primary partner, and we do encourage that. If you are in one of the eligible countries, if you are a research institution registered as such, etc., that we have outlined in the call.
Thank you very much. There was also a small question on what we mean when we say there needs to be a balance in budget between Danish and partnering institutions or countries.
Yeah, so you are asked when you submit or do your application in the online application system, you are asked to indicate the budget share of the Danish partner and the budget share of the Global South partner. And what we ask there is that it is fairly balanced. So if there's a very kind of skewed especially to the Danish side, because these are Danish development funds, then that is definitely taken into consideration by the committee. And I don't know if Lotte wants to add anything to that, or if that is enough.
I can just emphasize that yes, this is something that we do look into, and often near 50-50 is considered ideal, but there can be reasons why it's not quite even. But especially if we see that a budget has a very low south side, we get a little bit critical towards that, because the idea is that it's capacity building for all of us, but capacity building mainly for the south.
Thank you. So I think there's one question left that I want to pose to Cecilia, and then we are out of time. And maybe I see some people posing questions that might have been answered previously. So please rewatch this video if you feel like you did not get a response or missed the question that you wanted to hear, or contact us and read the call text. But Cecilia, there is a question from someone saying that they're a bit curious as to why there have not been a lot of grants to Palestine projects over the last decade or previous years. If it's a matter of not receiving many applications on this country, or what the challenges might be.
I'm unmuted. Yes, so thank you for the question. Palestine is one of Danida's priority countries, so it is usually included in the call. Since I've been involved in the development research grant, I believe we actually haven't received any applications for Palestine in the past few years. Obviously, the situation this year is highly risky. So if you do consider submitting an application, we want you to take your security assessment extremely serious. But it's just to say that Palestine is one of Danida's priority countries, and there is a bilateral development program there. So that's why it's included in the list. Yeah.
Rita, I actually have an answer to a question that I saw in the chat about, because I didn't mention ethical clearance.
Yeah.
So there was a question about whether you need to provide ethical documentation in the application. And no, you need to write about how you will apply for ethical clearance, and you need to consider what are the ethical implications of using your methods and so forth. But the process of applying for ethical clearance and permission comes after. But of course, it is an important part of the methodology. I think it is also described in the guidelines there. Just wanted to add that one. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I think Line might wrap up.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you for all the engagement in the chat. Thank you for being here with us. Thank you, Lotte and Cecilia, for clarifying. And as Ida also said before, please do email us if you have further questions or rewatch this video if you came in at a later stage. We do hope to receive applications from many of you. Yes, so that's it for now. And thank you.